Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is hosted and created by Lucy Mann, founder of Gunpowder Consulting.
Welcome back to Small Spark Theory. We are back in the Disco Pod in White City Place. Now, back in our October episode, we talked to Tony Spong at Intermediary AAR. Tony gave us a really interesting insight on, after years of working with clients and agencies and mediating pitches, Tony gave us quite a lot to think about in terms of what it is that clients are going through when they're looking to appoint agencies. And following on from that, I'm delighted to say that I've managed to cajole a client-side marketeer to come along and talk to us today about their experience of working with agencies. So I'd love to welcome Katie Pattison to the pod today. Katie has spent 25 years working with FTSE 100 companies, largely within property marketing. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. You have been working, as I said, for large corporations in a marketing role for some time now. But it'd be great if you could just give our listeners a little bit of background on what you've been doing up until now.
Yeah, it's quite a long story, really. I think I was a bit late to the market into my proper career because I started off life actually leaving college early and going and modelling for about 4 years. So travelling the world and having to be in places on time and seeing how the fashion industry works from the other way round, really. And it wasn't until I was 21 that I realised I needed to get a grip and go back to university and get a degree. So I didn't really do my marketing degree until I qualified about 25, so a little bit late to the game on that. And then my first lucky break, which I didn't anticipate going into property marketing, but I ended up interviewing and getting a job working for Stanhope. And they were the developers of the Broadgate estate in the city, which was really a groundbreaking piece of property development at the time. It spans Liverpool Street Station and architecturally is really, really interesting with lots of placemaking and public art. And it was just a great place to cut my teeth, really. And from there, I got headhunted to go and work for a company called Hammerson, which still exists today and it goes strong with lots of retail property. But back then, they also had a very strong office element to their portfolio. And the IRA had bombed 99 Bishopsgate in the city and completely taken out the centre core of that building. And I was brought in to pull together a marketing and PR strategy to change people's perception about that building and about the rebuilding of the building and taking space within it. So quite a challenging role, quite a fascinating piece of work actually to work on.
A bit of a baptism of fire.
Indeed.
Yes.
And from there I have worked for BP Pension Funds on the Knightsbridge estate, which is a mixed-use development right beside Harvey Nichols down towards Harrods, with office and retail mix, which is really interesting, looking at the science behind how shoppers and tourists intermingle in that space and how office occupiers want to work in that space. So very interesting. And then more recently with Hammerson, I've been launching all sorts of really exciting retail space from the Oracle in Reading in 2000, so quite a while ago. And then most recently up in Leeds last year, we launched the biggest John Lewis store outside of central London in a development called Victoria Gate, which has already won all sorts of accolades and awards for International Best Shopping Centre.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, very proud of some of those achievements and quite a fascinating journey with all sorts of different demands and creative solutions that I need agencies to look at, whether they're business to business or business to consumer.
So over that time, Katie, you've been managing marketing budgets, large marketing budgets. You've been dealing with agencies. Over those years, how have your requirements from agencies changed over time? And do you feel that agencies have managed to kind of keep up with the pace of change for you?
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when you're looking to an agency, what you're looking for. I think the digital revolution has been the biggest piece in how that's changed and what we're looking for agencies to provide us with. There was a period a couple of years ago where we went almost paperless. There was no print. I wasn't looking for brochure collateral. I was looking for things that were linked to websites or purely keynote or interactive PDF brochures. And that seemed to be sort of a modern way of working for a short time, particularly in the business-to-business world, where we were sending things back to retailers in Milan and they weren't going to physically be in the space. We're very reliant on, when we're building new developments, CGI work and virtual walkthroughs. These are all new technologies which are changing all the time. I mean, even last year we had to take and draw from scratch the shopping centre at Victoria Gate that we were developing in Leeds. And now we're working on Brent Cross in North London, and I can work directly with the architect on their Revit SketchUp, and we can deliver that as a really nice piece directly to a potential prospect now, without having to redraw the CGI, new CGI at all. It's really amazing how quickly that technology is moving. What I would say, though, is that also I have seen a resurgence in print. It's a bit like the LP coming back again.
Yes.
There's something about the engagement of those extra senses when something lands on your desk with a thud. It's the quality of the paper, and it says something else to people beyond what you get through a digital delivery. And I think the other piece, which we now use more and more, is that emotive film piece. So adding sound to something too really starts to engage people. And I find more and more that agencies will do that in a pitch situation where they're really trying to get your heart to engage in what their proposition is as well. And that's a real winner. I realise it's expensive. Sometimes we will even offer to pay for pitches because we know that these things are expensive. And I think that's quite unusual to pay for pitches. But when you're very serious about an agency and you know that you're going to get decent collateral straight off the bat, I think it's worthwhile.
Yes. I'd like to just explore that a little bit, because obviously the free pitching debate rages on in the industry, and it's something that comes up a lot. I work a lot with the Design Business Association, and they spend a lot of time campaigning against free pitching. I think the reality is that there will always be agencies out there that are prepared to pitch creative work for free. So it's up to agencies to make a decision on how they want to deal with those situations. But do you find where you're paying for a pitch, aside from the investment in the creative work, does it change how you work with those agencies during the process?
Yeah, I think that we do our due diligence quite well in advance. So we'll do an RFA. We'll shortlist to 3 before we even approach them, really. So we'll have done quite a lot of work. I don't want to muck people around.
No.
And so we tend to be quite conscientious about that as a business, which I'm quite proud of the fact that we do that. I realise that's not always the case.
No.
And I think that because the projects tend to be quite long-term, so when we're building things, it's normally 3 to 5 years at least. Yeah. So the relationship that we're building for those kinds of projects is a long-term one. And therefore it's amazing if you spend the time on the chemistry session, on writing a really good brief, how much more you get back from the agency in return. A quickly written half page isn't going to cut it, frankly, and you'll get back only what you put in. And so I realised that investing time in an agency and helping them understand what your issues might be, and also then potentially agreeing with them that the solutions they may come up with are great, but that maybe the creative solution isn't quite what you wanted. But being able to own that data is really important, because it may be that they didn't win that particular piece of work. And I think we're going to talk about that a bit later too. But it may be that they're then suitable for something else.
Yes.
So it's always worth the effort on both sides.
Yes.
Even if it doesn't mean that you get that first job.
Yes. Okay. Well, yes, I'd like to talk about relationships with agencies, and that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to agencies about is when they are approaching prospects. There's a tendency that I've seen over the years, particularly with agencies that are a bit nervous about new business, is to approach it in a bit of a scattergun approach, and they'll go through a really, really long list of prospects, knocking on doors effectively and saying, this is what we do, are you interested? Yes, no, and then move on to the next one and the next one, rather than thinking this opportunity is just a hello for now, but then they become somebody that you've met and you understand their work. You might not be right today. You might not have the right opportunity for them today, but in the future there may well be something where you can collaborate. So it's up to the agency to be able to try and continue that relationship. And I know in the race for new business, sometimes that can be overlooked a bit by the agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just be interested on your experience of that as a client.
Yeah.
And you must get approaches from agencies.
Yeah, all the time.
All the time.
All the time. And I try not to be rude.
That's good to hear.
But it is often about the way that they approach you, even down to the time of day.
Yeah.
Or the time of year.
Yeah.
And whether they've done enough research.
Right.
On you specifically as a business, what actually is going on with your business. It's really easy to detect the people that are just going through a roster of calls today, you know, and they might even put someone fairly junior on that cold call, which is also awful. I feel awful for them, and just scratch the surface, and they really don't know what they're offering you either in some cases. Yeah. So I tend to close those conversations down really quite quickly. Yeah. Where there seems to be a little bit more effort that's gone into it, and it might not be a phone call first, it might be an email with a link to something that they think would be interesting to you, followed up with a phone call. Then, I feel the need to be a little bit more respectful about that. Yeah. So, I might say, I'm really sorry, I haven't had a chance to have a look at that yet, but you've drawn it to my attention, I will have a look. Maybe we can arrange for you I've got nothing for you now, but I am quite interested in your infographics or whatever it happens to be that they're offering me as their hook. Can we agree to speak at a less busy time in a couple of months? So sometimes I'll close them down completely. Other times I'll leave the door open. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. But it's often about timing, need, and relevance. Those are the kind of three things that I think agencies need to really look at before they make that approach.
Yes.
And if you can go in there with something that you can genuinely identify is something that this client could be interested in, great. It makes that marketeer look good within their own business. Yeah. We've talked about that before, Oh, yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, okay, tell me more. I can feed that back into my business and it might grow into something. Yeah. I think the time of day is often interesting too. I think people are so busy and so full of meetings these days. I think beginning of the day is always good, and I think back end of the day is quite good too. Middle part of the day is a bit rubbish, frankly. And I think the other very clever play is to try and get yourself in the room before budget planning is in process. So for most companies that's about October stroke November of each year, where you're looking at your strategies for next year, you're looking at what you've got to outlay and where you're going to be spending your money and what new initiatives you might be looking at or what campaigns you've got to seriously be unfolding. And so I think that agencies need to wise up to that as well, because calling looking for work in the end of the third quarter stroke beginning of quarter four is not going to work because you pretty much spent your budget for the year. But calling with the idea of something for the following year is good.
And maybe actually you were saying about calling, looking for work. And I guess in an ideal world, what you want is somebody that doesn't feel like they're calling, looking for work, but they're calling, offering you an opportunity.
Yeah,
or
that's the clever way.
Highlighting an opportunity rather than feeling as though they're calling you, looking for work.
Yes. So very dry and slightly boring, but nevertheless necessary. We have quite a lot of facts and figures that we need to take data from our shopping centres, you know, the way that people shop the centres and the footfall and their average spend and their average dwell time, this sort of thing. And on paper, you know, these numbers are fairly boring, but actually they're really important when we're talking to a future retailer to say, you need to come to the Bullring. Yeah. This is where you need to have your next store. Yeah. A, because it's a fantastic second city in the UK, and because there are 17 million people passing through your front door every day. And being able to take that and to turn those facts and figures into something interesting. So we had last year someone who came to us purely with a sell for interactive infographics. Yeah. Sounds a bit boring, but actually this guy just happened to call at the right time, and we had a need. We had a requirement to be able to turn those into dynamic figures and turn them into something really interesting within a film. Yeah. And he just was brilliant at sorting that problem out for us. Yes. But so, he'd done his homework, so he'd looked at what we already had and thought, well, they can do better than that. I can offer them a solution. So it is about doing your homework and it being relevant. Great.
And I know that, and I have this conversation with agencies sometimes, and I think there's a worry of going in, particularly in that instance, and saying, OK, they could do better, because they're a bit terrified of being shot down, particularly if they don't already have a relationship with the prospect. But I guess it just means pitching it in the right way. Presumably that person didn't contact you and say, actually, what you're doing isn't very good. I can offer you a better solution. I'm sure that it was couched rather more sensitively.
Yes, and he sent links for work that he'd done previously and how good it was. Yeah. And his offer to help.
Yes.
Which is a really good way of putting it.
And the language is really interesting, isn't it? I think the offering support and offering to help and seeing if there's an opportunity to help rather than looking for work, looking for an opportunity to work for you. It's a small difference, but it actually makes absolutely quite a difference. Okay. So as well as agencies getting your attention when they're contacting you cold, when you're actually choosing an agency, so you've got to that situation, you've written the brief, you may or may not be paying for the pitch process, and you've got your three agencies together. What are the factors for you that can tip it over the line?
Yeah, I think we are, again, depends on what the problem is and the solution we're looking for. Sometimes it may be that, I'll give you an example, in Leeds we chose a fantastic local marketing and creative agency that offered marketing solutions, and they also offered creativity. And we were investing in a local business, which I loved, the fact that they were based in Leeds. They were our eyes and ears while the development was going on for 4 years. But they were also closer to that market. They were, weirdly, our audience. So that was a huge help, because they had so much relevance to the problem and what the solution might be. Yeah. I think other factors that we look at are, creative flair, obviously, a fresh take. It isn't necessarily always sector agencies that we want. We might want to go outside of what is envisaged to be a property expert agency. Yeah. We might want a fresh pair of eyes on something. Yeah. Particularly with B2C, we will look more broadly than that. Sometimes it's value, but not always. Yeah. If the money is there, if the budget is there, you want to spend it well, but you want to spend it. Yeah. And I think probably the other key thing is that chemistry piece. It's the people liking people. People want to work with people they like. Yeah. And the great account management that goes alongside that. As a business, I think that we rely quite heavily on our consultancies and agencies to provide a lot of support for us.
Yeah.
We don't have heaps of people in the office to do that. So that's very important. The efficient account management and not having to repeat yourself, and for them to get it and then go over and beyond and say, well, yeah, we delivered on that, but actually we've thought of this as well. What about this? And just stretch the idea and possibly be a bit more challenging. So creative flair, definitely.
Yeah.
Value sometimes, but not always. And definitely a feeling that you will get on with your account managers and that they're going to be attentive and loyal and supportive and responsive.
Yes.
I think those are really important things.
So when it comes to retaining or recommending an agency, do those same factors apply, or are there some of those factors that become more important than others?
Yes, I think that we've talked before about this. I have a chap, I call him Superman, and I will literally phone him up or I'll email him and say, have you got your red pants on today? And he'll say, okay, yep, what do you need?
Yeah.
And it will be agencies like that I personally build trust in, and I know that they're always going to get me out of hot water on something that's come in last minute, which it does very often. Yeah. Suddenly there's a retailer that's come over from Milan in London for 2 days. I need to turn around and digitally print a brochure, or I need to edit a film, or I need various pieces of campaignable collateral to wow and woo with. And he's able to pick up the mantle because he already has quite a lot of that collateral to hand, because he's designed it already. Or they become almost inside outside. You know, they're an outside resource, but they know your business, they know your brand DNA. You don't have to repeat yourself, and he will be able to magic it out of thin air almost. So it's relationships like that which become really, really valuable.
So I'm presuming then that Superman has a culture in his agency that is very much around delivering a brilliant experience for clients.
For the client, yeah.
And making sure that the client feels supported, that kind of bomb-proof
I think
feeling.
that he has almost identified that as his main USP, because he's a very small agency.
Yeah.
So, 10 people strong, that's it. Tiny agency, but working for a big FTSE 100. That's quite an interesting, if you look at that, we don't always go to big agencies. Sometimes the smaller agencies are exactly what we want, because they will work harder for you. You're a big client for them, and they want to retain your business. And so it works beautifully. And quite often I will find myself quite frustrated with some of the larger agencies where you are a much smaller fish in their pond, and therefore the account management just isn't as good.
So, Katie, what are your top 3 tips for agencies, and where do you see that they have an opportunity to make marginal gains when they are either approaching new prospects or trying to retain their business?
Quite a hard one, really. I think that just go gently and manage your own expectations. I know Tony talked about this in a previous podcast, but, your first meeting is a bit like a marriage. You might not necessarily get the work straight away. So manage your own expectations on that. Possibly just do your research properly and offer some advice for free, potentially. That's always a really good one to get people interested in you. And just look for small wins that might get you a chance for some of the bigger stuff later on, I think would be really worthwhile. And just understanding your prospects' objectives and timings. So all of those things will get you to a place where they know that you've done your homework, and they will listen on that basis. They won't just shut you down.
Great.
That's what I tend to respond to
I've noticed lots of agencies now, those that have a coordinated marketing and new business plan, will be using thought leadership as a tool to prospect, and quite often that manifests itself in events where they can invite clients and prospects together.
Perfect.
Do you get invited? Are you
Yes.
Responsive to
Yes.
those invitations?
Yeah.
Great.
Because there's personal development within that as well,
Yeah.
selfishly.
Yeah.
And also because you just never know who you're going to you might meet,
Yes.
who can influence or help. You might meet prospective retailers, independent retailers. You just never know. So always good to have a bit of that calibre up your sleeve as well. So yeah, good networking opportunities like that to be offered out are brilliant. And also to get to know a prospect as an agency in a more informal environment.
Yes.
I think that's, as we said earlier, about relationships and working with people that you like.
Yeah.
That's a very good opportunity just to find out a bit more about them outside of what they do at work.
Yeah.
That's a key thing. And in fact, we use it in our own marketing strategies all the time to talk to retailers in a less formal environment at something that we know they're passionate about.
And what piece of advice have you been given that's really stuck with you?
Well, I'm married to a Yorkshireman who's a man of very few words.
Right.
Which sometimes is very frustrating for someone like me because I'm a chatterbox. And he's always said to me, you've got 2 of these, those are my ears I'm pointing at, and 1 of those. Can you get them in the right order? And I think it's true. And as I've got older, I have realised how powerful it is to just listen to what people are saying, and actually even listen to what they're not saying, both in terms of your own conversations or possibly conflicts and trying to get your own way within a marketing strategy or something internally, or even when you're being pitched to. Just listen and let the agency tell you what they're going to do for you, and don't jump in and interrupt. And I find I'm much more broad-minded for listening. I get opened up to all sorts of other ideas, things that I didn't think were in the plan and suddenly are. So I do think everyone could benefit from chatting less and listening more.
That's particularly good advice, I think, for agencies in a new business scenario, where I think certainly there can be a tendency when nerves kick in to go in and just keep talking.
Yeah.
And have you experienced those sort of first agency meetings where someone comes in and just doesn't stop talking?
I think sometimes that will happen where you have maybe an account director and you then have the art director there, and they're segueing between one part of their presentation, maybe the strategic kind of overview piece, and then the warming people up and getting them excited about what the creative solution might be. And sometimes it will go a bit pear-shaped somewhere in between the two. Maybe the account manager will oversell it and not let the creative have its time and have that proper airing. So that does sometimes happen. And also I think sometimes with a junior, and that's not me saying, gosh, don't bring juniors to pitches, because everyone has to learn. But maybe a bit of rehearsal in advance to really keep them to script would help sometimes. And the only other piece of advice I've got, which agencies should know really, is that we have budgets as marketeers, as you know, as a client. I have a budget. I need to spend the money. So my other piece of advice is, when you know that this is quite a big project, don't be afraid of the money. I have to spend it. If I don't spend it, I won't get it again the following year.
Interesting.
So there is something to be said for that. If you really believe in what it is you're delivering and you've done all your costings in a way that you genuinely don't think you're fleecing the client, but it is worth the money, the client will believe that too, I suspect. And don't be afraid of that.
Which brings me to one of the issues that I know agencies struggle with all the time, and it's one of the things that they bring up with me all the time when we're talking about how to prospect and how to pursue a new business opportunity through their new business pipeline. And I always encourage them to try and have a conversation about budget quite early on, not necessarily to understand what the budget is exactly, but to at least understand that there is budget there for that activity so that nobody's wasting anyone's time. Quite often, agencies will say to me that they ask the question about budget but feel that they don't get an answer, or they just say, well, put your proposal in and we can't divulge the budget. How do we break that impasse with, you've got a budget to spend, the agencies want to have some idea of ballpark of how they should pitch their ideas? How do we navigate that?
It's tricky. I think that sometimes in pitch situations as well, you're being played off against two other agencies.
Yeah.
And it will depend on what the priority is. Is it a value project?
Yeah.
Or is it because they want absolutely stonking creative solution?
Yeah.
I think it's often helpful for a client to have a shopping list.
Yeah.
Where even if you can't get them to tell you what it is, you're able to break down your costings and why they are what they are. I think that's really, really helpful, because when you haven't worked with an agency before, there's often a bit of mistrust as well. Mm-hmm. Oh, they're very expensive. I don't know what their fee will be, but I'd like to see how much they charge for, account management and various pieces of their armoury. I think it's good to have your day rates. Just be outright honest with it. I know that's probably not answering your question because you'd like the client to come to the table. There's no harm in just saying, this is a 5-year project. What sort of ballpark are we in? Even that in itself helps build the relationship, because you're being honest with them and saying, we really want this work and we want to do a good pitch for you. Yeah. But it would help us enormously just to understand roughly where we are. A, because we won't consider the pitch otherwise. I mean, that you probably wouldn't say that, but it would be nice to know. And secondly, because we want to make a really good job of this for you. So we need to be able to manage your budget accordingly. I think that's just a really good opportunity to have a further conversation. Sometimes they'll play, sometimes they won't. I would always respond well to something like that. It shows responsibility, and it shows that you're taking it really quite seriously and you want it.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you. In time-honoured tradition, I'm going to ask you for your favourite book, TED Talk, or inspiring figure.
And I'm afraid to say that I've been really greedy, because I've got several people that I had to mention. So
Brilliant.
I've got more than one,
The more, the better.
Well, so first up, last year I went to a conference where our guest speaker was a chap called Tim Smith. I'm sure you might have heard of him. So he built the Eden Project down Cornwall. Yes. And he was amazing. I was transformed by the way that he spoke. He didn't take a corporate stance on anything. He was quite off the bat. I don't think he was even fully sort of prepared in terms of what he was going to say. But the overriding thing that came across was his passion, his absolute passion and commitment to his cause, no matter how difficult or how many challenges he faced. Taking a chalk quarry pit in Cornwall and turning it into this sort of ecological mecca, and the messaging that goes with it. I found him truly inspiring, and I would say to people, have a look at him online, read his book about how he created the Eden Project is amazing, and you can apply it to all levels of your own life, really. The other person who's very current right now, who is just a huge inspirational figure to me, is David Attenborough.
Oh, yes.
What an amazing man.
Well, we're recording this after the first episode of Blue Planet 2 has just aired.
Amazing.
Yes.
And I think the fact that he's still in his 90s and he's so passionate, again, you see a thread here in my thinking, but to be the age that he is and still to be bringing this into everybody's living rooms. I mean, I've grown up with David Attenborough, and it will be a very sad day when he departs. But what I have gained knowledge-wise, some of these places that I will never, ever go to in my life, but things that I've seen that have only been on my sofa because of him are truly inspirational. So I just think he's an amazing man. And then a couple of other bits. I've got a TED Talk, Simon Sinek, Start with Why.
Yes, lovely.
I think it's the basis of everything. Again, putting the why at the heart of your business. It rings true every single time. And you can see it even in campaigns that we've done where you've tried to understand what the essence of it is and do it from the inside out. I just think it's very powerful. And finally, I have a book, which is The Alchemist, which is a book that I've gone back to several times in my lifetime. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to pronounce his surname very well.
I'm not sure anybody can.
I think it's Paulo Coelho, and he has a really lovely saying in this book which says, remember, wherever your heart is where you'll find your treasure. And I think that goes for business and life in general. If you really have the passion, as Tim Smith or David Attenborough did, if you can apply that to your own life, you're always going to be able to find the treasure.
Fantastic. Well, we will be giving away a copy of The Alchemist to a lucky listener. So if you join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory, and we will pick a winner in December and send a copy of The Alchemist. Katie, that's been really interesting. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
This has been our final episode of Small Spark Theory for this year. We hope you've enjoyed our episodes so far. The good news is we're going to be back next year. We've got more experts to talk to about different parts of the marketing and new business experience. If there's any particular areas that you think we haven't covered yet that you'd like to hear more about, then by all means just get in touch. You can contact me at lucy@gunpowderconsulting.com. In other news, I'm delighted to announce that we're going to be hosting a very special Small Spark Theory event in the new year. So look out for more news about that. It's going to be in collaboration with YCN. To find out more about how you can get involved, just get in touch. Our details are on the website at gunpowderconsulting.com or email me at lucy@gunpowderconsulting.com. We'll see you next year. You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets, #SmallSparkTheory. The podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann. Our editor is Claire Aban, and our producer is Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Juke Deck, available at jukedeck.com. This episode was recorded at the Pod at White City Place. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com. And if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.